Well, I tried to avoid talking about it, but unfortunately it looks like there's no way around it. It's time for me to do my review on what is probably the biggest flopbuster of 2025, being Disney Pixar's newest movie, Elio. But had some good amount of heart and a little bit of soul, and it was something that really was lacking any of that Pixar magic and really any of that cohesion that usually ties together these amazing kids movies. Now, to be completely transparent, I'm a huge fan of old classic Disney and Pixar movies. That's every single Disney VHS tape, just about, from the classic era, especially of all the animated movies. So I care a lot about animation, I care a lot about children's stories because they're really deeply important. And as tangible as the problems with Elio are, you can tell that there was an attempt to do something of importance. There was almost a story akin to Treasure Planet buried deep within Elio, and they just struggled to find it. The biggest problem with Elio is that it was made by people who don't know what they're doing. Had you had somebody with any kind of sense or moral standing, you could have actually turned Elio into a decent movie with a decent moral through line. Problem is, they were so afraid of consequences that they didn't bother doing that. At its core, Elio is a movie about an 11-year-old boy who's lost his family, lost his anchor, and lost every single person who's ever cared about him. And now he's thrust into a world that doesn't really want him and surrounded by people who aren't interested in him all the time. And that's causing a lot of problems for this little boy. And therefore, he decides the best solution is to get kidnapped by aliens. Now, when I first went to see Elio with my mom, great seeing movies with her, we went to Regal, because I have Regal Unlimited. I go in there, and the ads are shorter than normal, so I missed the first 10 minutes of the movie. I have to go back the next day to watch the first 10 minutes of the movie. And let me tell you, those first 10 minutes actively make the movie significantly worse than it started out to be. From what I missed, I just assumed that there was some good setup that I had missed. And I was wrong. The setup is horrible. It's atrocious setup. Here's the setup for those who aren't going to go see the movie. You start in a diner with Elio and his aunt Olga. His aunt is his caretaker, and you hear someone say, "Oh, Olga, I heard about how his parents died," or whatever. He sneaks away, finds a display room, and activates it, and now he's obsessed with space. He found a display room and now he's obsessed. That took 30 seconds to set up. He then goes to the beach every day and tries to get kidnapped, and then he creates a ham radio club to invite, and when somebody comes who's enthusiastic about a ham radio as well, he steals the boy's ham radio. Ironically, he steals the ham radio from the black kid, and then proceeds to destroy the device. It partially gets destroyed because another kid wants to look at and is very enthusiastic about what Elio's doing, and he refuses to tell them, which causes him to get poked in the eye by some of the apparatus, and then he proceeds to beat the shit out of the little boy who's trying to become Elio's friend. The weird thing is, the kid that Elio beats the crap out of is the person who's supposed to be the primary antagonist of the film, being the bully. For some reason, the person who we want to paint as the victim and the victimizer and the bully is the victim of Elio assaulting him. And I'll give the film a little bit of kudos. There are two decently violent films for a kids movie. The kind of thing where Elio pummels a kid and then Elio's about to get the crap beaten out of him. And they actually leave that in. And I'm very shocked by the fact that they didn't cut that, because it's a little bit edgier than Disney would usually go, given how utterly sanitized and HR focused the world has become. Now, aside from the edginess, there's really not a lot to praise except for one of the two characters. And I'm going to go into spoilers because this movie isn't worth not spoiling. Glordon, the tardigrade, is an adorable little creature, the kind of thing that's going to sell a decent amount of stuffed figures, because tardigrades are already kind of cute in a really weird, unearthly way, and then making it just this really huggable one it was a smart choice on Disney's part to make a tardigrade the cute side character. Now, the point of Glordon's character and Elio's character, they're both trying to find where they belong, and they assume they belong in the Communiverse, which is this community of commie aliens who combine all their technology and everything's peachy there. Both Glordon and Elio assume that this is the best place for them to live and where they will find happiness and connection. The point of the movie is that's actually untrue, and where they need to be and where they should be is at home with their family. And this is handled in two ways. The first one is Elio. Now, Elio gets cloned, and his clone goes to Earth and basically copies his life while he's on the Communiverse, seeing if he's worth becoming a member of the Communiverse. And he sees his clone and his aunt bonding, and that makes him feel connected. And then there's Glordon, who his father is a warlord and a monstrosity who wants to put him in an Iron Maiden suit that he can't get out of that turns him into a war machine. Glordon doesn't want this, so he assumes his father doesn't love him. And if it feels like I'm skipping a lot of things or I'm missing a lot of context, understand, it's not in the movie. The movie is so bare bones in most of its stuff that what I just said basically encapsulates the entire movie, and the movie is just getting from point A to point B. There's a lot of wasted time. The middle chunk of the movie, about 20 minutes in the middle of the movie, is all dedicated to Elio walking around the Communiverse. Basically what's playing behind me right now. This takes about 20 minutes, and nothing happens. To the best of my guess, the entire purpose of that scene was, please audience, don't get bored. Our movie is boring. Do not get bored. We're going to show you all these fancy little things. And some of it's going to make you chuckle, but there's absolutely no depth to any of it. Elio is a good background film currently, but what makes me kind of frustrated is that I could have probably made a good film out of it. It's pretty simple. The setup is Elio's parents are dead. His parents were his tie to the real world because they understood him. They even spoke his made-up language. They knew how to speak it. And now that he's living with his aunt, who's had to postpone her career as an astronaut to take care of him, something that she hasn't fully gotten over. He feels like a burden, and he decides to get away, go to space. And then as the movie comes to a close, him and his aunt get an understanding of each other, including Elio sacrificing some and understanding her. Problem is, his sacrifice is also wholly unearned. There are also very little consequences for anything Elio does, aside from when he tries to basically what causes the climax of the movie is Elio decides to clone Glordon so Glordon can stay in the Communiverse and send the clone off with the father. The father freaks out because he can tell the clone isn't Glordon, and that causes the dad to go and just try and destroy the Communiverse to get his son back because he actually cares about his son. He's a good father, despite being a warmonger and a monster. The movie is so bare bones, there's very little to actually communicate about. There's very little to opine about. The movie is incredibly empty and kind of dodges a lot of the responsibilities. The tone and the theme of an abandoned child is something you can really work with. But honestly, I think this movie would have been better served had they actually gone in properly on the comparison between Glordon and Elio. What I think should have happened is you have Elio and his mom are tightly connected, and then his mom dies. And then it's his father who's the one who's trying to connect to Elio. And that way, Glordon and Elio are both dealing with paternal problems, as opposed to different situations entirely, where Glordon's trying to connect with his dad, and Elio's trying to connect with his aunt, who's now his guardian. It's a completely different dynamic. Part of the theme of the movie as well is the notion that neither Elio nor Glordon actually gave their initial cultures a chance. They didn't actually try to see if they were able to fit in that environment, and therefore, when they left unceremoniously. And while that's kind of pushed forward with Glordon, as Glordon leaves because he thinks his dad doesn't want him and he thinks his dad would prefer a clone to him, Elio has very little setup for that. The setup for that is what I mentioned earlier in those first 10 minutes. His parents die, he lives with his aunt who has to give up her career, and then he creates a ham radio club to steal a ham radio from somebody, and then he gets sent to boarding school, and then gets kidnapped by aliens. That's the chain of events, and that takes about 15 minutes to set up. In which there's no discussion, and this movie has no discussion about how Elio is to blame for him not having any friends, for not having a connection, because he's not willing to foster any. The movie never engages with that point of discussion when it really should have been a huge focus that Elio wasn't focusing. The theme is that Elio didn't give it a chance, and he should have, and how do I know that's the theme? Because they literally say, I didn't give them a chance. That's it. That's the only setup here. Now, after a certain point of the movie, what ends up happening is Glordon accidentally sets off Elio's spaceship because he gets a special little spaceship designed connected to his biometric signature. Only he can open it, and accidentally sends himself to Earth, which of course is a bad idea because Earth is far too cold for Glordon because he requires a volcanic level temperature. And so Elio barely manages to get back to the Communiverse with his aunt. His aunt's helping now, and they barely manage to make it back before Glordon is about to die. He's about to freeze to death. In which his father, the giant monster, takes his carapace, which is the Iron Maiden outfit. It has spikes on the inside, so he can't take it off. It's permanently harming him, but it turns him into a monster. They specifically say that if they were to take off their armor, they would dishonor themselves and their entire family. And as the leader of this species, that's kind of a big deal. When he sees that his son is freezing to death and about to die, he instinctively, immediately shoves his hand into the middle, rips it open, comes out and swaddles his son to protect him, in what is a truly great scene. As a father who once only cared about his image and the level of threat that he was to everyone else and how evil he was, is now allowing himself to be utterly vulnerable and protecting for nothing more than family. Glordon is where this film shines. The entire thing there is where it deeply is focused and where it is really effective in telling its story. There's a lot of heart in Glordon's story. Unfortunately, there's absolutely no heart in Elio's. Elio is kind of just there, and he's kind of an asshole. And it seems a lot of people kind of agree. If we go and look at the review from Batting Into the Comics, they're a bit more cruel than I would have been by giving the movie a 1 out of 5. I personally think this movie's probably a 6 out of 10. You know, it's not offensive in any way. So what he ends up saying is the prose is thematically satisfying, which I agree with, especially with Glordon. Where they handled that is great. Glordon is the MVP, 100%. The universe is visually the best part of the film, and it actually does look amazing. And there are some gags within the universe that work really well. Cons, Elio's a little prick that you can't stand. Yes, the film is so boring and struggles to find its pace the majority of its runtime. The one thing I'll say is that it actually managed to carry some of the pacing in a way that distracted me of how bad it is. If you think about the pacing, it's really bad. But the way they handled in the movie, usually pacing is something that I notice and am affected by heavily. The pacing isn't too terrible, but that's also because I missed the first 10 minutes. Watching the first 10 minutes recontextualizes the entire film and makes it a lot more boring. The film has an opportunity to end the right way, but chooses the dumber and more predictable way instead. Yeah, no, everybody gets away kind of scot-free, and there's very little consequence at the end of the movie. If it had done it right, Elio would have faced a lot more consequences for his action and would have also been allowed to redeem himself instead of just kind of skating by. And worst slow-mo in an animated film ever. Yeah, there are some slow-mo scenes. Now, in Elio's defense, the way that they do slow-mo is very reminiscent of how old movies did slow-mo. You know, where the frame rate gets really choppy and it gets like very cutted and there's a lot of motion blur. The bad way to do slow-mo, that was the only way to do it for a long time. That's how Elio does it. So I think it was stylistic and not an actual limitation. Now, what I love about this review is this paragraph that actually starts talking about the film. There are themes in Elio that are circled back around in elegant fashion. Elio loses his family before the film even begins. He's also weird enough that he doesn't have any friends. The film tries to paint Elio in a creative light, like he has this big imagination because he's invented his own language and can lie himself into and out of any situation, but he mostly comes off as a shitty person that treats his hardworking aunt, who only wants to support him and for him to love her, like dirt. In fact, in hilarious fashion, this review that is designed for a kids movie uses the word shit 3 separate times. I'm not saying it's not warranted, because it kind of is, but it's funny enough to note, because Elio is in fact a really bad protagonist, one who is never once shown dealing with consequences of his own actions. There's a hint at him feeling remorse for how he treated his aunt, only because he sees how good his clone interacts with his aunt. But he doesn't feel bad for how he treated Olga, he feels bad for not fostering a connection between him and Olga. And of course, the market is treating Elio accordingly. Now, in Elio's defense, it was a movie that was advertised heavily 2 years ago when it was first made, but it had such poor test reception that they had to completely retool the entire movie. And you can kind of tell that it's been completely retooled. Then they advertised it decently heavy in theaters over the last couple of months, but they really did almost no advertising outside of the theater market. And thus, the film was rewarded with a $37 million opening weekend, which is utterly depressing for a movie that, while they claim costs $150 million, is probably closer to around $300 million. Before marketing is accounted for, which means this movie needs between $600 to $700 million to break even. Now, one thing I will say is this movie does have the chance to actually have a lot of legs. One thing I noticed is when I went to watch the first 10 minutes, which was yesterday on a Tuesday, that movie, Tuesday at 5 p.m., had more people in that theater than any of the weekend days. So I think this film is getting some decent word of mouth, and it might actually have the chance to last all summer in theaters and possibly break even. There isn't exactly a ton of competition in this little kid market, so maybe Elio will manage to barely crawl to the finish line. So Elio really is the kind of movie that, had it been made by, say, John Lasseter, it would have actually been really good. All of the puzzle pieces for a good film are hidden within this movie. The deep emotional core, a self-reflective main character, and a strong parental positive through line. You could have made a really good movie. If Disney wasn't so afraid of male-dominated films, this could have been a movie about two sons trying to relate to their different fathers. And you could have turned this into the perfect Father's Day film. I really do believe that this movie should have been about Elio trying to connect to his father and Glordon as well trying to connect to his father. And the movie coming out to realizing that maybe both of them need to put in some more effort. And you could have done something. There was even a character, a nerdy little scientist who had almost no role in this movie whatsoever, who probably was once meant to be Elio's father, just like Olga was originally meant to be Elio's mother in the original version of the film. And I guess the last thing really worth pointing out that I should comment on is when it comes to the DEI stuff, because everyone's always concerned. I had one friend who tried to paint this movie as a disgusting communist cesspool. It's not. That's not in this movie. You don't have to worry. This movie is safe to take your kids. It's somewhat enjoyable. If you're paying for like Regal Unlimited, go see it. It's fun. Why not? It's a good way to spend 90 minutes. But if you're going to have to pay like $100 to take your family, maybe don't. But this movie's perfectly safe, it's perfectly acceptable for little kids, and there's very little messaging that you're not going to want. This movie isn't going to program your kid to think communism is cool or anything, but the communiverse is a little commie-coded, but just a little bit enough that you might roll your eyes if you even pick up on it. As for the other DEI stuff, there's some noticeable things with, you can tell which kids are the good guys and bad guys, or at least which kids the movie wants you to think are the good guys and bad guys based on the skin color of the kids. There are 3 children who have speaking roles. There is the black kid, Elio, and then the blonde kid. I think the blonde kid's name is Bryce, and I forget the black kid's name. The black kid is the one with the ham radio, the blonde kid is the black kid's friend, and then Elio just tries to the ham radio. So, the blonde kid is supposed to be this horrible bully, and when in reality, he was somebody trying to help his friend, who he went to the ham radio club with the black kid as his friend, and then he tries to get back at Elio for destroying his friend's ham radio and beating him up. And then they give the black kid a little bit of redemption so you know he's not actually a bully because he actually helps Elio at the very end by communicating with him. So you can tell that there was an attempt to DEI it a little bit just based on the demographics of the different kids, but it's not really there. People are making a much bigger deal about it than it really exists. It's not really something you have to be concerned or worried about. This movie isn't going to program your kid. This movie isn't trying to. It's just not a great movie. So there's nothing offensive about it. At the end of the day, I'd have to give the film, like I said, about a 6 out of 10. It's not offensive, and it won't stand the test of time, but it's the kind of thing that you can throw on for your little kids and not be overly worried about. But that's pretty much what I've got. Let me know in the comments if any of you guys have seen this film, and I will see you guys on the next one.